It is my pleasure to introduce today's speaker, Kathryn Kellam. Kathryn grew up in South Carolina and has loved having her fingers in the dirt ever since childhood. After a career in professional development and research, she became an extension master gardener and a wildlife sanctuary program ambassador. Kathryn's greatest pleasure in gardening is being able to eat and drink what she grows, while also providing sustenance to beneficial insects and wildlife. She is active in public education, supports the help desk team, and co-leads the Delray Plant Clinic in Alexandria, Virginia. She enjoys providing gardening support to her neighbors in Alexandria, and she is nurturing a tiny food forest in her small urban yard. Welcome, Kathryn.
Well, thank you very much for that nice introduction. And good morning, everyone. And welcome to the Kitchen Herb Garden. I am really looking forward to talking with you today about growing and using culinary herbs. Now, in terms of our program, we're going to start out by defining what we mean by an herb versus a spice. And I also want to inspire your thinking a little bit about where you might grow herbs and spices with a focus on smaller spaces. We're going to cover 12 culinary herbs and spices today, 6 for full sun and 6 for part sun. And I want you to know that all 12 of these plants do well in containers, and some of them actually need to be grown in containers in our Northern Virginia climate. I will also share my favorite 6 herbs to grow indoors in small pots on a sunny windowsill. And of course, we'll break for questions a couple of times. As you can see, part sun gets equal billing with full sun, and we really have a lot of nice options for your garden. So let's deal with the technical part. Let's clarify what's an herb versus what's a spice. Now, if you ask a chef, the chef is going to say that flavorings are all herbs. That's the terminology they use. But if you go to the grocery store to buy some dried herbs, you're going to have to look for them in the spice section. So obviously we're using these terms somewhat interchangeably, but there is a technical difference that I want to share with you. Herbs are technically the soft parts of a plant that we use for flavoring. So think leaves, soft green stems, flowers. Those are all herbs. Some examples from today are basil, rosemary, cilantro. And one of the great things about herbs is that they typically grow well in temperate climates, like we have here in Northern Virginia. Now, contrast that with spices. Spices are flavorings that are generally the more rigid plant structures. So think seeds, twigs, fruits, roots, bark. Those are all spices. And spices that we're going to cover today are dill seed, coriander seed, and ginger and turmeric rhizomes. Now, a lot of spices need a tropical climate to thrive, but there are some tropical spices like ginger and turmeric that can actually be grown successfully in Northern Virginia, preferably in containers. So with that, let's pause for a moment and look at some ideas for where you might grow your herbs and spices. Now, first up, what I want to do is inspire some creative thinking, and I love this picture. This is a gorgeous garden, and the first time I saw it, I have to confess that it intimidated me. I immediately thought, I can't do that. But there are actually some great lessons here in this picture on building a garden. This beautiful little garden actually uses very little planting space. If you look, there's a little bit of in-ground gardening. There are a few containers scattered around. There's a stone wall with a trellis, and there's an arbor that take things up vertically. And this is really a small garden in terms of planting space, but look how lush and productive it is. And I want you to hold on to this concept when you think about your own garden spaces and some techniques that you might use to maximize that space. Now, let's look at some other ideas. This is a slide I call Small Gardens and Tuck-ins. And starting in the upper left, this is a garden bed that's dedicated to herbs. It's an herb garden, and it also includes some blooming herbs, and that helps to attract beneficial insects, which is great for the health of the garden. Now, notice here that these plants are really well spaced. They are not crowding each other. The other thing I want to point out is this is a garden that has great access for the gardener. The gardener can get around the outside on three sides, and then inside there are stepping stones. So basically, the gardener can reach all the plants comfortably to harvest, to maintain the bed, and never compress the soil around those plants. Now, to the right of that is a smaller garden bed. This is what's known as a keyhole garden. This is a type of raised bed. It's really good for drainage. It helps you build a quality soil because you're setting it up above your regular soil. And it has great access all the way around the outside. And then there's that little keyhole that lets you get to the middle of your garden bed. These typically have a small footprint, usually about 6 feet across. And I want you to notice that right in the middle of the planting area, it actually incorporates a small compost bin. So as you're tidying up, you can throw your plant material in there, let it break down, and then just put it right back in the garden bed that it came from. Now, below that is what I call a tuck-in garden. And this is an existing garden. It's typically an ornamental garden, but it's easy to tuck in some herbs and grow them there. You know, when I look at a space like this, I can picture sage, globe basil, some parsley. They would fit right in. And one thing I love about this one is that it steps away from the back door. So the gardener can come out, do a little harvesting, take it in, and use the herbs. Now, I know most of us, including me, we have less space than this, or we have space that's more challenging. Let's take a look at some boxes and raised beds. In the upper left, this is what's referred to as a table garden, and this has wonderful access for the gardener, and it's ideal for someone who has like problems bending or stooping, and it's a perfect size for small herbs and small bedding plants. Now, to the right of that are some boxes, some large box gardens, and these are typically purchased as kits. You just buy them and assemble them. And one of the things I love about these is that you can put them anywhere you have the right sun. It could be on a driveway, it could be on a patio. And I love the depth of these boxes. As you can see from the picture, you can get a really lush and productive garden with them. Now, below that, this is a photo that I took in my neighborhood. This is a front yard that used to be incredibly challenging. It was really steep. And several years ago, the homeowners had it converted into terrace beds. And it is now a really usable garden for edibles, for herbs, for vegetables. I took this picture a few years ago in winter. You can see the snow there, but they use it year round. I actually walked by there yesterday and they've got their spring greens growing in there and it looked beautiful. Now, we don't all have terracing or that opportunity, but if you look to the left of that, you'll see a stacked bed that's quite small, small footprint, but it mimics that terracing with multiple layers. And just like with a regular terrace garden, it has great drainage because the water can flow easily downhill. Now, what I love about this little stacked bed is it's very easy access for the gardener and it creates some microclimates because water runs downhill. You're going to have drier soil at the top and moister soil at the bottom, and you would want to plant your herbs accordingly. And then with a focus on microclimates, this is the granddaddy of microclimates when it comes to growing herbs. It's the herb spiral, and it is a classic permaculture technique. That 360-degree spiral creates a lot of microclimates in a very small footprint. So you not only have different levels of moisture from top to bottom, but you have different amounts of direct sun. So the south and west sides of the spiral get more direct sun, the north and east sides get less direct sun. And then again, drier at the top, so wonderful for Mediterranean type herbs. And then moister at the bottom for your more moisture loving herbs. And another thing you can do is you can actually play up that moisture differential. You can put a grittier soil mix at the top and then a richer one at the bottom for more moisture retention down there. And again, this is a garden bed that has a very small footprint. These are typically 6 feet in diameter. Now, the two pictures on the right are from Oklahoma State University, and they shared the internal planting dimensions. They said that that bed is 10 inches deep inside, and then that spiral bed going all the way up is actually 18 feet long. So that's how much planting space you can get in that small footprint. Now, I know this and the keyhole garden are probably new to many of you. In your handout, we have links that will get you to construction instructions on those two types of gardens and also links to videos on people building those. So hopefully that will be helpful to you. One thing I want to mention here, it's not specific to herb spirals, but to really anywhere you plant your herbs, is that whenever you're planting them, you want to plant with the mature size of the plant in mind. It's tempting to put small plants closer together to make it look more full, but give them the full space they need for their mature size. They will be bigger, they'll be healthier, and you will get a lot more harvest that way. And with that in mind, let's take a look at containers. I love container gardening. I love containers. They are great on patios. They're great on balconies. You can drag them in the sun, drag them into the shade. You can drag them inside in harsh weather to protect your plants. But one thing I want to point out here is how large these containers are for growing herbs. Now, I know we don't all have the same opportunity to use big containers, but where you can, using a larger container will give you bigger, healthier, more lush plants. They will be much happier in their growing conditions and you will get a much better harvest. And it's really beautiful. So with that background, let's start looking at specific herbs and spices for sunny locations. Now, first up is rosemary. Salvia rosmarinus is the Latin name. This is a wonderful herb and it is absolutely beautiful in the landscape. It's got those woody stems and the leaves are really tightly rolled so they look like little pine needles. They typically grow 2 to 6 feet tall and 2 to 4 feet wide, and they'll give you flowers. They'll be either white, blue, or lavender, depending on the variety that you grow. And they all attract bees, butterflies, even hummingbirds. And one thing I love is that goldfinches will actually come in for the seeds as well. And rosemary tends to be very pest resistant when we grow it outdoors. Now, it's a Mediterranean herb, so it likes low to moderate amounts of water, and it is very drought tolerant once it gets established. But you do want to keep that soil moist while your plant is getting established. And then anytime we go through a really extended dry period, you are going to want to water it. Now, to start rosemary, you want to grow from a transplant, not from seed. And recognize that we here in Northern Virginia, we're on the edge of its hardiness zone. So you really want to grow a cold hardy variety. Now, if you look at the upper right-hand corner of the slide, you'll see I've listed 4 options for cold hardy varieties. Alcalde, Madeline Hill, and Athens Blue Spires all have a reputation for being a bit more cold hardy than the regular rosemary. But the absolute hardiest one, and the one that tends to be most available in our garden centers, is ARP, A-R-P. And that one has become my personal favorite because it is so hardy. I do want to mention, however, while we can grow it outside and the hardy ones do well, rosemary does not like our winter wind at all. So if you plant your rosemary in an area that's exposed and it's not very protected, you might want to consider putting up just a simple windbreak as a little bit of protection. And then in spring, you're going to want to clean the plant up a little bit. You can cut it back up to 1/3 of the size of the plant and do this to shape it and also to just initiate its new growth for the new season. Now, flavor. Okay, the flavor of rosemary is most often described as being pine-like. It's very pungent. You may pick up notes of eucalyptus or clove in it. It's used in a broad range of cuisines, particularly Mediterranean cuisines. It's common in Italian, French, and from the French, it has inspired Cajun and then also Greek cuisines. And there are a lot of different kinds of applications for it. It's wonderful to just chop up some of the leaves and add it to bread dough before you bake your bread. It's a classic in stuffing. It's wonderful in pasta sauces. That's one of my favorite uses. It's great in stews. Another thing I like to do is put it into water when I'm going to steam vegetables, and it will infuse some of that rosemary flavor into my vegetables. Really nice with potato. Our favorite way of using it at my house is to put entire stems of it on top of salmon. When we're grilling the salmon, that is wonderful. And if you grill and you use charcoal, then what you can do is just throw in a handful of leaves the last few minutes for whatever you're grilling, and that smoke will infuse some of the flavor into your dish. Now, harvesting rosemary is really easy. You just clip a few stems, however far down you want to go, hold it at the top, run your fingers down to strip off the leaves, and that's your harvest. And if you want to preserve some, it dries really well on the stem. This is a nice one for drying. Now, moving on, our next one is thyme. Thymus vulgaris is the Latin name, and this is another perennial evergreen herb that's also lovely in the landscape. Like rosemary, it uses low to moderate amounts of water, and this one is low growing. It only gets 6 to 12 inches tall and wide. Some folks actually use it as edging in their perennial beds, which I think is quite nice. Now, I will tell you that while the plants tend to stay small their first year, they do tend to ramble over time and they can start to look a little bit ragged in the herb garden. And there are a couple of ways that you can deal with that. One is every year or two in early spring, you can just cut them back severely back to their center. It recenters the plant and it encourages it to just kind of renew itself from that point. And that works really nicely. Even better, though, I would say, is harvest your plant a lot and use that harvesting to prune it and shape it. And that helps keep it in a tight space and you get to enjoy that harvest. And then, like rosemary, this is one that you want to grow from a transplant or take a cutting from another plant. It's also great in the pollinator garden. It has flowers that bees and butterflies love. And flavor. Okay, I love thyme. It does come in a variety of flavors. I really like common thyme. That flavor is floral, it's a little bit sharp, a little bit sweet, a little bit peppery. It's kind of pungent. There is a lemon thyme that actually has a nice distinctive lemon flavor. There's an orange thyme, which I think tastes maybe a little bit more citrusy than specifically orange, but it's nice. And there are some varieties I have not found and been able to use. I've read about them. There's one that's supposed to taste like nutmeg, and there's one that's supposed to taste like caraway. And I think those will be interesting. Now, in terms of harvesting, you can harvest thyme anytime during the summer. The flavor is said to be at its peak just before it flowers. And you harvest it like rosemary. It's the same thing. You clip the stem for as much as you want, run your fingers along, and just strip the leaves right off. But I will tell you with thyme and with rosemary both, my shortcut is if I'm going to be using it in something that I'm cooking for a long time, I just drop entire stems like into a soup or a stew and let it simmer for a long time that way and then fish them out before I serve. But if you do that, count the stems, count them going in, and make sure you get every one of them coming out. Now, sage is the next one, Salvia officinalis. This one's also a perennial evergreen, and it's a really pretty plant. That's actually a picture of my sage plant there. This is a plant I love having in the garden just because I love those silvery gray leaves so much. It likes low to moderate moisture like the first two. Sage will tolerate rocky soil and it will tolerate drought once it gets established. It's fairly good size. It'll get 2.5 feet tall and 2.5 feet wide, and sage will sprawl. So give it its full 2.5 feet. Otherwise, it will just ramble over your other plants. Now, you'll see Bird Garden in the upper right of the photo here. That is the variety that I grow. It is a little bit hardier, it has a little bit bigger leaves. It does have fewer flowers, but what I really love is it's more compact in its form. It only gets a foot high and 18 inches wide, and that really works well in my space. Now, sage is a plant that really needs good drainage, and that is especially true during winter time here. And if you have heavy clay soil, you really want to improve that soil, loosen it up with some compost, and improve the drainage before you try to grow sage in it. If you can grow your sage plant in a raised bed or in a big container, it will do even better. Now, you do want to prune the plant in the spring. It does flop around and ramble. It will refresh it. And pruning also encourages new growth in a plant. It tells the plant to grow. And then with sage, you're really going to want to plan to replace your plant every few years. I figure kind of 3, 4 years. What happens is as it sprawls and grows, the basic plant starts to get more and more woody and it produces fewer and fewer leaves to harvest. And so when you see that happening with your plant, just recognize it's time to start over with a new sage plant. Now, sage also has flowers that are great for pollinator bed. The bees and the butterflies love them, and you may even occasionally get a hummingbird. Flavor-wise, sage is smoky to me. It's also musky. It's a little bit bitter. I really feel like sage is a plant that gets underutilized in the kitchen. It actually combines really well with the other Mediterranean herbs, and it is outstanding with fresh lemon juice. I think most of us are familiar with it in terms of poultry seasoning. It's a classic part of that. It's great in Italian dishes. It's great with meatloaf. It's used a lot with sausage. I love frying up the leaves really fast in olive oil, like 30 seconds per side. Get them out, put a little sea salt on, and eat it right away as an appetizer. It is so good. And I also like to think about sage outside the box. I will sometimes just harvest a few leaves and tear them into strips and put them on a sandwich like a burger or in a sandwich wrap. It really elevates the dish. It's kind of like a more adult flavor of that sandwich. And another nice thing about sage is you can actually harvest those leaves throughout the year, but don't just pick them off your plant. You want to prune the stem for the amount of leaves that you want, and then take the leaves off for your harvest. Once again, this is one more plant that it's said to be at its peak flavor in the summer, just before it blooms. Now, there is a picture of a different sage on the slide. In the middle of the slide, you'll see a beautiful picture of pineapple sage with those bright red flowers. This is a different plant. It does grow a bit differently, but the leaves actually taste like pineapple, and I wanted to share that with you. They're sometimes used in cocktails, and that's a lot of fun. And as you can see, it's a great pollinator plant. It blooms really, really late in the season, so late you might think you're not going to get blooms, but let me tell you, the pollinators love it. It's a great nectar source at that time of the season. Okay, next up is sweet marjoram, Organum majorana. This is another wonderful herb. I love the flavor of marjoram, and it is a really pretty, compact plant in the garden. It gets about 15 inches high and wide. You're going to start with a transplant or take cuttings of another plant. It likes its soil a bit moister than the other herbs that we've talked about so far. And then once it gets established, though, it's very drought tolerant. But here's the challenge with marjoram. It's a tender perennial in our area, and it does not often survive our winters here. But there are a couple of ways you can try to overwinter it if you want. One is you can try bringing it inside. I would say root just a small piece of it, put it in fresh potting mix, and bring it indoors. But recognize you may get hitchhikers in the way of little pests coming in with it. So if you want to try this, I would say you want to soak it thoroughly in insecticidal soap maybe even more than once before you bring it inside. I have tried this every time I've done it. At some point, the pests find it. So, but it's worth trying. And I don't want to discourage you from doing that. But there is another alternative that you might want to consider, and that is you can plant it outdoors in a warmer microclimate. Some examples of a warmer microclimate are things like a sidewalk or a concrete driveway, or if you've got stepping stones in a garden, those structures are heat sinks. They will retain warmth. And whatever you plant alongside them will have a milder winter microclimate because of that heat. That is a nice way to do it. I have a master gardener colleague who has actually wintered over marjoram multiple years in a row using this technique. So I know it does work. Now, in terms of growing your marjoram, if you're growing it in the ground, you really probably don't need to think about fertilizer at all. But if you're growing it in a container over time, then at some point you probably want to give it a little bit of a fertilizer boost. And then flavor. Sweet marjoram, it tastes fresh, it's floral, it's grassy. It tastes exactly like a milder form of oregano, if you're familiar with oregano, and it blends really well with other herbs. It is a key ingredient in the French herb mix, Herbes Provence, and also in the Middle Eastern Za'atar herb blend. And there's a handout in your materials that has recipes for a number of different herb blends, and it includes both of those. So I'm hoping maybe you'll be inspired to try something new or some new combination. Sweet marjoram is really good in pretty much everything, as you can see from the slide here. But what I would say is if you haven't worked with it before, but you have a recipe that calls for oregano, maybe a pasta dish or something, try sweet marjoram instead. I tell you, you will not be disappointed. It is a lovely herb. In terms of harvesting it, you can harvest the plant once it gets at least 6 to 8 inches tall. And it's the same thing. You clip it off, pull the leaves off. The more you harvest, the more you get. Now, at some point, you will start seeing flower buds forming. You can try to fight that. You can try to pinch it back. I don't even bother anymore. Once I see those buds forming, I just cut the whole plant off half, maybe even a little more. That removes the flowers and it tells the plant to grow. And what you'll do is you'll trigger a second flush of growth when you do that. And that is absolutely the most flavorful. That is the most delicious that your marjoram will ever be. Now, next up is dill. Anethum graveolens is the Latin name. This is a wonderful plant. It gives us the herb, the dill leaves, and then the spice, the dill seeds. And dill will get 4 feet tall and 2 feet wide, so it's pretty good size, and it wants a moist, well-drained soil. And be aware, if you let the soil get too dry, it will just go to seed early. Now, dill is an annual. It will die off over the winter. It's really easy to grow by seed, and that's how you should grow it. Dill is in the carrot family. It has a long taproot and it does not like to be transplanted. So I would say don't buy it at the garden center and bring it home. Grow it from seed. You can actually start planting dill before our last frost date. In Northern Virginia, you can start in early April, putting the seeds out, and then just do successive plantings, like every 3 weeks, and that will keep you getting a nice harvest of the dill leaves. It likes cool weather, and so you really want to focus on that before we get into the heat of summer. Now, if you let it go to seed, then it will come back on its own if you let that seed get loose. But remember, that is our spice. That's our dill seed spice. So that's a good thing too. Dill tolerates deer well. It's another fabulous pollinator plant. Bees and butterflies love it. And because it's in the carrot family, it's actually a larval host plant for the black swallowtail butterfly. So if you look at the upper right corner of the slide, you'll see a pretty caterpillar up there, and it's actually eating dill fronds. And if you see that in your garden, please just let the caterpillars eat it. The butterflies really need our help, and my philosophy is plant more and have enough to share. Now, flavor-wise, okay, dill leaves taste lemony, and a little bit bittersweet. And you'll also pick up notes of like celery and anise. The flavor of the seeds is a little bit stronger than the leaves. The seeds taste like the dill leaves, plus if you added in some caraway. Now, using the seeds, if you haven't done this, they're great in pickles, and they've actually been used for making pickles since at least the 17th century that we know of. For using them every day in your kitchen, if you make your own bread, they're very easy to add to bread dough before you bake it. What I love to do is put dill seeds and any other like light spice seeds, small, delicate spice seed, put that in some oil, like olive oil, and saute it up, infuse that flavor into the oil, and then put all of it, seeds, oil, everything on top of a dip, like hummus. It's wonderful that way. It's also wonderful on curry or just serving it with bread. It's a great way to use the spices. The leaves make an outstanding pesto. If you make pesto from basil, just substitute dill. It is absolutely wonderful. This is a go-to lunch at our house whenever we have dill available. In terms of cooking with dill, don't cook. Okay, the heat will cause the flavor to be completely lost. What you want to do is use it cold. It's great as a garnish. Put it on fish, put it on chicken. We love putting it on top of beef stroganoff in the wintertime. And then cold dishes like cottage cheese. I like to put it in dressings. When I make a green goddess dressing, if I have dill, I always put a lot of dill in there. And then in terms of preserving it, you want to freeze it. Don't bother trying to dry it. Wash the dill leaves, let them air dry a bit, and then however much you want to defrost at the same time, just pack that all tightly in the bag, roll it up, squeeze the air out, zip it up, put it in the freezer, and then in the wintertime, take it out and make pesto. That's what we do. In terms of harvesting, you can really harvest the leaves anytime you have them. This is another one where they say the flavor peaks right around the time the flowers first open. And then for harvesting the seeds, you're going to want to do that as they ripen, just before they get really brown. And in terms of the method, we're going to talk about that method when I get to the coriander seeds. So that will apply back to the dill seeds as well. And then our last herb for sunny conditions is basil, sweet basil, also called Genovese basil. Ocimum basilicum is the Latin name. This is a tender perennial, and we grow it as an annual because it will not survive our winters. It gets 12 to 18 inches tall and wide, and it wants rich, moist, well-drained soil. It will also tolerate being nibbled on by critters like rabbits and deer. It handles that real well. A few things to know about basil. When you see flower buds or flowers starting to show up, pinch them back as soon as you see them. Do that to protect the flavor of the leaves. Sweet basil, once it starts going to flower, the leaves will become bitter, and there's no back button. You can't undo that once that happens with the plant. So what you want to do is you want to harvest frequently, you want to prune it frequently, encouraging branching and producing more leaves rather than letting it go to flower. Now, basil is really sensitive to cold. It does not want temperatures below 50. And so here in Northern Virginia, we have what we call the Mother's Day rule. Wait until after Mother's Day before you plant your heat-loving plants. Now, I will tell you, I will often wait until around Memorial Day to do that. But that just really helps minimize the stress on things like basil, tomatoes, peppers, etc., that just do not tolerate that cold. I'm not really talking about diseases today, but I want to mention two with basil because it is very susceptible to them. One is Fusarium wilt. It causes the plant to wilt and die. It's a soil-based pathogen. If you know this is a problem in your garden, just grow your basil in pots. Give it a good high-quality potting mix and it will do great. Now, the other is basil downy mildew. This is an airborne pathogen. It does not overwinter here, but it does overwinter further south. So what happens is it travels here on the air currents every year, and eventually it lands on our sweet basil. Now, there are some disease-resistant varieties, and I would encourage you to grow one of them. I've got names of three of them in the upper right of the slide, Prospera, Obsession, and Devotion. And at least one of these should be offered by your garden center or your local nursery. You can also grow any of them from seed if you like to grow your basil yourself. Basil flavor. Okay, traditional sweet basil, minty, peppery, or as I like to say, it's the taste of summertime. I love sweet basil. Now, to the right of sweet basil on the slide, you see Thai basil, and that has more of an anise or licorice flavor. You will also see beautiful flowers on that basil. This is a bonus when you grow Thai basil. Those flowers never seem to hurt the flavor of the leaves, and the bees and butterflies love them. So the pollinators get support, and you still get a delicious harvest. And then on the bottom, a couple of other examples of flavored basils. Lemon basil does taste very lemony. Cinnamon basil is kind of a mix of kind of cinnamon and anise flavors together. Now, my opinion, sweet basil goes on everything. Fresh fruit, throw it in a smoothie, put it on a sandwich like lettuce. I feel like it's very delicious and very versatile, and it freezes really well. If you want to preserve it, that's what you want to do. Freeze it in olive oil, take it out in the middle of winter, make pesto again. That's what we do. In terms of harvesting basil, this is important. You can start harvesting when your plant is at least 6 to 8 inches tall, but don't just pull the leaves off. That will really shock the plant. What you want to do is clip off the stem, and you want to leave behind enough stem that there's at least 4 leaves on that stem still on the plant. That lets the plant use that to branch out, create more branching, create more leaves. That's how you harvest, and it's also how you prune your plant and how you encourage the plant to keep making leaves and not flowers. When you harvest your basil, never store it in the refrigerator. Remember, it hates the cold. And what will happen is the leaves will turn black. So what you want to do is give the stems a fresh cut, put them in a glass of water at room temperature, just leave it out on the counter, and then just use them as you need them. That works great. All right, do we have any questions here?
Yes, we do have a few questions. Thank you,
Okay.
Kathryn. One regarding rosemary. Is it too late to prune rosemary?
No,
Okay.
it isn't. It's just fine to go ahead and do that now.
Okay, that's good. And another question was, why are some herbs hard to take cuttings and root? Namely, the person was referring to rosemary and sage.
Rosemary, I have found actually roots easily. If you take the growing tip, cut off a few inches, and strip the leaves from the bottom part and root it in water, I have had luck doing that without any problems. So I wouldn't try necessarily rooting it directly in soil. I haven't tried it that way, but you should be able to do that with rosemary. I have not actually started sage using that same technique, but I would think that that would work well as long as you have only a little bit of leaf at the top. You want to leave some leaf on there for the plant to feed itself, to photosynthesize. But since the stem below doesn't have any roots on it, it's not going to be able to support a lot of leaf up top. So maybe if you have not had luck in the past, maybe try it with leaving just a little bit of leaf material at the top and see if you can root it that way.
That's helpful. Thank you, Kathryn. Someone asked, can you speak to African blue basil?
Yes, I have grown this. It's been a few years. It's a beautiful plant. It was an accidental hybrid. I don't remember what they believed it hybridized from. It's not fertile, it's a sterile basil. So every one of those that's grown is a clone from the original parent plant. It is a fantastic pollinator support plant. If you grow it, it will be absolutely covered with bees in the summertime. It's an amazing nectar source. But you will need to either winter over a cutting or buy a new plant, or somehow keep it going over the winter in a mild environment, or replace it the next year. But yeah, it is a beautiful plant, and I have grown it for pollinators.
Oh, wonderful. Another question, are there varieties of herbs that you've already spoken about, mentioned in the handouts? Someone asked, particularly
Yes.
hardy rosemary that you mentioned.
Yes, there is another handout that you will be getting that has copies of all the slides on it.
Okay.
And so you should be able to see all of that information when you get that after the program.
Okay, thank you. Can you use cactus type soil mix for the ones needing really good drainage? Would you recommend that?
I have not actually used that soil mix, but I do understand it is grittier. And so it does improve drainage. I think that's going to be on a plant by plant basis because that is going to drain moisture out quickly. You're going to be watering more frequently.
Okay.
And if the plant that you're thinking of likes things a bit richer, that soil mix may have trouble hanging on to nutrients. And
Oh,
so, what you might want to use is that as something to break up, maybe a heavier potting mix. So, sort of mix and match depending on what the plants need in terms of its soil growing environment. But I do mix soil mixes sometimes to try to get that right for individual plants.
thank you for that. Can you speak to herbs and companion planting? Is that something that you do?
I would say I do it sort of incidentally and not intentionally. One of the great things about herbs is, of course, those big flavors are also big fragrances. It's a lot of chemistry that those plants put into the air. And so, one thing that can happen is, depending on the individual herb and the individual insect or critter, it may not like those smells, and that may help keep it away from other things in that area. I don't know how much true science there is about this herb for that plant. I see a lot of stuff out there. I haven't seen as much science behind individual pairings. But what I do think is having a great variety of plants, and particularly plants that are very fragrant and very flavorful throughout the garden, really does help the garden health overall. And I do think it is that confusion of chemistry that helps to compel that. And so I do encourage that. I like tucking herbs around wherever I can grow them for the beauty, but also that fragrance. I really enjoy that.
Thank you. I'm going to take one more question. There's a few more waiting, but I want to make sure you get through your presentation and we can get to them at
Sure.
the end. Someone started thyme oregano from seed inside. Is it okay to plant them outside now?
It's going to depend on how mature they are. They are plants that are hardy in our area, but here's the issue. They've been growing indoors in a protected environment and they're going to want to be hardened off. So I would probably get another week or two into May, particularly if they're not very mature, and then start hardening them off. And that means gently introducing them to outdoor conditions, move them into a shady spot for a while, then a partly sunny spot, and then into a full sun spot if that's where you're putting them. But those little leaves from indoors are not used to the outdoor conditions and particularly full strength sun. So you want to ease them into it.
Okay, thank you, Kathryn.
Okay, so let's switch and talk about herbs and spices that do well in partly sunny locations. I'm going to confess up front to you all that the first three plants that I'm presenting here are not hardy in Northern Virginia, but they really can thrive here if they're grown in containers and given some protection from the cold. And I love all of them. So first up is sweet bay laurel. Laurus nobilis is the Latin name, and this is a gorgeous evergreen tree. It's native to the Mediterranean, and you're going to want to grow it in a container. Start with a transplant. This plant is really hard to propagate. It wants well-drained potting mix. You do want to let it dry out a little bit between waterings, but do not ever let it get bone dry because your little tree will die if that happens. Bay laurel loves our hot, humid summers, but not our cold winters. If you let it go outdoors in summertime, I call it going to summer camp, it will thrive in a part sun environment as long as it's warm. But you're going to want to bring it back indoors while the temperature is still above 40. And it wants to be in bright sunlight. So a south facing window is really perfect for that. The tree is slow growing And that's really actually great because it's easy for us to keep it small. And you're going to want to prune it at least once a year during a time it's not actively growing. It lets you shape the tree and it also encourages the tree to grow. And of course, you can use those prune leaves in your cooking. And then you're going to want to prune the roots every 2 years. And that gives you a chance to freshen up the potting mix, mix in some compost, just really kind of renew the tree that way. And this is a plant that does want to be fertilized. It wants a balanced fertilizer and it wants it in spring and early summer. That's the period the tree is actively growing. Do not use a high nitrogen fertilizer. You will get more growth with that, but the leaves will not have as much flavor and the plant will be more likely to attract pest insects. Now the flavor, it's sweet and it's savory. When I open the bag I keep my bay laurel leaves in, it smells like black tea leaves to me. So wonderful, rich flavor. And a nice thing about this plant is it's the bigger, older leaves that are actually the most flavorful. Now in cooking, it adds the savory and sweet qualities to a dish, but you need to simmer those whole leaves in the dish for a long time. They need moisture and they need heat release over time to get the flavor out of the leaves and infuse it into the dish. And it's wonderful in those long cooked dishes like beans, soups, stews. I've put them in long cooked rice. Anything I put in a crock pot gets at least 2 leaves on it. One thing you want to remember though is you have to remove the leaves before you serve it. They do not soften over that long cooking. And those sharp edges can actually be dangerous if they're swallowed. So like the woody stems I talked about earlier with the herbs, count them when you put them in, count the same number when you take them out. Now you can harvest sweet bay anytime the tree's not actively growing. The best flavor is said to be at midsummer. This is just after the active growing period. And when you harvest, you can use it fresh. It tastes good. It's really okay to just go ahead and do that. But the best flavor will come if you let it dry for a few weeks. And that's really easy to do. Just lay those leaves on a paper towel on a sunny windowsill, and 2 or 3 weeks later, put them in a sealed container and they'll do great. Some people actually even pop them in the freezer and they feel like they hold the flavor even better there. Now, first of our 2 tropical plants, ginger. Zingiber officinale is the Latin name, and this is a plant that has really slender stems, narrow leaves. It always looks like a little bamboo plant to me. It'll get 4 feet high and 3 feet wide, and the spice that we know as ginger is actually the underground part, the rhizome, what we often refer to as a root. And there's a picture of that in the upper right of this slide. Now, it is a tropical forest plant, so it's not hardy here, but it grows really well in a big, wide container. I usually use a 15-inch container, but it has done just fine in a 12-inch container for me. It wants a moist, rich, organic soil. It wants part sun, and morning sun is really ideal for ginger, and it loves our heat and humidity. To plant it, you want to start with a rhizome that's smooth and it has several healthy buds on it, and you want it to be organic. That means you know it has not been sprayed with an anti-sprouting substance because, of course, we want it to sprout. We want to be able to grow the plant. So you take that rhizome and you plant it about 4 inches deep and you water it just very lightly. You want it to be very lightly moist, not at all wet, and you wait until that new growth begins. Once it begins, then you can water it more regularly, the way you typically would a house plant, and you want to start fertilizing it regularly. Ginger and turmeric both, which we'll talk about next, they are heavy feeders, and so fertilizing them monthly will get you better production and stronger rhizomes. And then ginger, when it grows underground, it has a tendency to want to grow up and poke out of the soil, as you can see in the photo there. Expect that to happen. It's not a problem. Just keep throwing more potting mix on top. That's referred to as hilling up when you do that, and that's absolutely not a problem. Now, It does not tolerate cold, and you definitely want to either harvest your ginger or bring it indoors before the temperatures get down to 50. There are a few things that ginger just does not tolerate. It doesn't want soil to be wet. Moist is good, wet is not, and it will not tolerate cold conditions. The rhizomes will rot in either of those conditions. And then it also does not tolerate full sun in our Northern Virginia summers. It will damage the foliage, and that can give you poor growth overall. Now, in terms of flavor, big flavor. Ginger ale, ginger snaps, gingerbread. It's sharp, it's hot, it's spicy, it's citrusy. It is a classic in stir fries and curries. It makes a great tea. It pairs surprisingly well with chocolate and with lemon and lime flavors. And what you may not be aware of is every part of the plant is edible, not just the rhizome. So shoots, stems, leaves, etc. The new shoots coming up and then the younger leaves, you can use those as a chopped garnish. They have just a very mild ginger flavor. The older leaves and stems, they're a bit tougher, but they have that mild flavor. And I enjoy using them when I'm making broth to get that flavor in my broth. And then the flavor that you get from your rhizomes will depend on how mature your plants are before you harvest them. So if they're kind of in that 5 to 7 month old range, you'll have a mild flavor. That's what's traditionally thought of as baby ginger. To get peak flavor, you need to get them to like 9, 10 months old, which means you're going to need to bring them inside for a period of time. And I have done that successfully as well. In terms of harvesting, dig up the entire plant. My experience is I get better quality rhizomes that way. Some people will say harvest from the outside in gradually, but rotting can set in. That's been my experience in terms of leaving that broken area under the soil. So I say just bring out the whole plant. Remember to save every part of the plant you want to use, not just the rhizomes. If you want to start another plant, save one or more of those rhizomes that have nice eyes on them to start another crop soon. Once you harvest those rhizomes, get off all of the loose like potting mix, but then let them air dry for a week or two, just in a dry area. I put mine in my basement and let the potting mix that's there just dry on them. That's a process called curing. And give it a week or two, and then you can break them into the sizes that you want. Now, at that point, I'll put a few in the fridge that I'm going to use over the next few weeks. The rest I wash, I clean up, and I freeze them. That's the best flavor retention you're going to get with ginger. If you are someone who likes to peel your ginger before you cook with it, peel them before you put them in the freezer. You don't have to peel it. I never do, but if that's what you want to do, peel it before you freeze. Now, turmeric is ginger's cousin. Curcuma longa is the culinary turmeric that we use. This is a beautiful plant. It's got those big old leaves like canna lily leaves, and of course it gives us that beautiful orange rhizome too. It is tropical, so again, you want to grow it in a container. Those big leaves will catch the wind and it can flip over really easily. So you'll see I am growing that plant in a ceramic container. You want that heavy container to stabilize the plant. So that's something to keep in mind if you want to grow turmeric. Now, just like ginger, it wants a rich, fertile, moist soil. Rhizomes typically plant those kind of 2 to 4 inches down, evenly moist, never soggy. Once it comes up, like ginger, you want to fertilize it monthly. With turmeric, be really patient. It can take weeks or even months before that plant sprouts. So if you want to grow it, you really do need to be patient with it. Now, flavor, most of us are probably most familiar with dried turmeric. It's spicy, it's earthy, it's bitter. It actually harmonizes really well with other flavors in blends because of that little bit of bitterness that it brings. But the fresh turmeric tastes completely different to me. It's very floral and grassy. It's just really, really fresh tasting. And turmeric is the plant that gives curry its signature gold color. It is also the plant that gives American mustard, its bright yellow color. It is used for all kinds of different commercial dyes, and that is something to bear in mind because it will stain your fingers and it will stain your clothes if you get it on there. Now, if you have not worked with fresh turmeric before, it is really easy to start incorporating this into meals. If you stir fry, just throw it into your stir fry with some chopped ginger. It's nice in soups, it's nice in stews, it's nice added to broth. It makes a gorgeous rice if you add it to the water before you boil it and put your rice in. It's just a beautiful rice. An interesting point, ginger and turmeric both flower, and they seldom actually flower in cultivation. But the flowers, they're also edible. They can be eaten as a vegetable. And then those big turmeric leaves can be used to wrap things for cooking, the way banana leaves are used. So that's a fun thing that you might want to try as well with your turmeric plant. And in terms of harvesting and preserving, it's exactly the same as with ginger. Now, moving away from the tropics and back to the temperate zone, Coriandrum sativum. This is the plant that gives us the herb cilantro and the spice, the coriander seeds. Focusing on the leaves first, this is a fast-growing, cool season annual crop, and it grows really easily from seed. It does not like our heat and humidity. This is a crop that wants to be an early spring crop, and then you can grow it again in the fall. And morning sun is ideal for cilantro in our environment, and it really wants moist soil. Plant it by seed. It will come up in 1 to 2 weeks. It is really quick to mature. I'll explain that more in just a little while. But to get a continuous supply of leaves, like with the dill, just keep doing succession planting like every 3 weeks. That's how you are able to harvest cilantro over a period of time. The temperature zone it loves for its leaf development is between 50 and 85 degrees. And once we get over 85, it will bolt. What that means is it puts up a flower stem to make flowers and seeds. Now, seeds are not a bad thing. That's our coriander harvest. But for the leaves, we really don't want that bolting to occur. To know what your plant looks like when it bolts, look at that lower right-hand picture on your slide. That is a cilantro plant that has started bolting. And see the tap roots on the slide here as well. This is another herb that's in the carrot family. So it is also a larval host plant for the black swallowtail butterfly. Now flavor. Okay, so cilantro flavor is polarizing. And the reason for that is that some of us have a genetic variant that causes us to taste a chemical in the leaves that actually makes those leaves taste soapy. For the rest of us, it does not taste soapy. It's grassy, it's earthy, citrusy, peppery, and it's an herb that you want to use fresh. It doesn't dry well and it does not do heat well. So throw it into your salad mix, put it in salsas, pico de gallo, chop it up and use it as a garnish on your hot dishes. I know some folks want to put it in things like tortilla soup. And what I would say there is take the soup off the heat, stir the leaves in at the last minute. They will probably retain some flavor that way. I like to just put them as a garnish on top. Now the seeds. Okay, the coriander seed flavor is really not controversial. It's warm, it's spicy, it's nutty, it's great in baked sweets like cakes and pies and savory dishes like curries and stews. If you make your own chutney, it's wonderful in chutney. To harvest, okay, the leaves, as soon as they are like 5 to 8 inches tall, just cut them off. Use them right away, or if you want to save them for a while, you can wrap them loosely in plastic and refrigerate them. The seeds. Okay, let's talk about harvesting these seeds and also the dill seeds. You do not want immature seeds. There's a picture on your slide of what the coriander seeds look like when they're immature. They are really bitter at that point. What you want to do is leave them on the plant until they are completely dry. They'll be a gray-brown color, and that picture on the right shows you your plant's not going to be pretty at that point. Your seeds are maturing and they're drying. And then before you get very many of the seed pods shattering, you want to harvest. You just cut the stems off at the bottom, flip them into a big paper bag, And don't close the bag. Put it in a cool, dark, dry location. Give it a couple of weeks. What you want to have happen is get any residual drying to occur at that point. Once they've had a couple of weeks in that environment, shake the bag, loosen everything up. If you need to, you can roll some of the pods in your hands to loosen the seeds. Separate the seeds from all the rest of the plant material, and you have your own homegrown coriander spice. Okay, let's go on to parsley. Petroselinum crispum is the Latin name, and parsley actually comes in three forms. There's the flat leaf, the curly leaf, and the turnip rooted, also known as the Hamburg parsley. We're going to focus on the flat leaf. And the reason for that is it has the best flavor. Parsley is a really pretty compact plant. I really like it in the garden. It gets about a foot high and a foot wide. It's a biennial. We grow it as an annual, and it grows really well in the same part of the garden as your cilantro. It likes cool weather, it likes moist, rich, well-drained soil. It's in the carrot family. You see that taproot there. So if you do try to transplant it, be really careful with it. I always recommend growing from seed, but I will tell you, growing parsley from seed outdoors, the germination can be a little bit erratic. You can scatter some around where you want it, and eventually they will pop up. If you want to start it inside, it will germinate more quickly, but then you have that transplant issue. One thing you might want to consider if you want to do that is using peat pots, because you can plant the pot and all. When you take it outside, the root will not get so much shock to it. It's in the carrot family. It's a larval host plant for that black swallowtail butterfly. And flavor. Okay, the flat leaf has the best, sweetest flavor, and there is a whole lot going on in that flavor. It's big and fresh and grassy, peppery, a little bit bitter. I like the fact that it has an acidic bite to it. There's some brightness in there like you get with lemon or vinegar. It actually makes a great breath freshener, and it's a surprisingly good source of vitamins and minerals. Now, this is one you can use in hot dishes as well as cold dishes. So salads, grain bowls, tabbouleh is a parsley-based salad. It's a classic, but you can put it in soups and stews, meat or fish dishes. It makes a spectacular green chimichurri sauce, and this is another one that I like to use when I make green goddess dressing. To harvest the stems, just cut them off an inch above the ground, but you always want to harvest from the outside of the plant inward. The center of the parsley plant is the growing part of the plant. It's the growing center, and you don't want to whack that off. So harvest from the outside in. That also lets you shape up and clean up your plant and keep it pretty. And parsley actually keeps its flavor in the cold. It will give you good flavor until the temperature gets down in the low 20s, and that's a really nice thing. Okay, our last part sun plant is mint. I'm focusing on spearmint here, Mentha spicata, because it is the most popular mint flavor, and it is a really sweet flavor and fragrance. And this is another easy to grow perennial herb. It loves rich, moist soil. It is an aggressive grower. It spreads by runners, so beware of that if you put it in the ground. We highly recommend that you grow it in a container to contain it. And that is why I chose this photo. I love this picture. It was taken by a professor in Mississippi. He collected a bunch of abandoned ice chests. These are ice chests that like blew off the backs of pickup trucks going down country highways. And every time he would see one, he would rescue it, take it home, put drainage holes in it, and plant a different mint in each one. So this is his mint collection. And every one of these, it's contained, but it has a lot of growing space. And so he gets a big harvest from every one of his mints. Now, whatever mint you grow, don't worry about it going to bloom. You are not going to stop the blooming from happening, and the butterflies will love that. But once the flowers start to fade a little bit, just shear the whole thing. And when you do that, you will get a bunch of new growth, and that has the absolute best flavor. Whatever mint you're growing, if your mint ever stops tasting sweet, it stops tasting good, just shear the whole thing, and you'll spark that new growth, and it will taste wonderful again. Now, I'm showing 4 different mints here. There are a lot of different mints out there. Our focus mint, of course, is the spearmint. It has the bright, sweet flavor. It's terrific in beverages. To the right of that, with pretty purple flower, is peppermint. Peppermint is the mint that gives us that cooling sensation on our tongues. Below that, you'll see orange mint and chocolate mint. Now, orange mint does have some citrusy notes in it, but it is not a sweet mint. Chocolate mint, my research has told me that it's a cross between the orange mint and peppermint. I will tell you, every time I have tasted a chocolate mint, it basically tastes like peppermint. It has that chocolate coloring, and I think that's probably where the name came from originally. But I'm sharing this with you as my public service announcement here. It's basically buyer beware, not just with flavored mints, but any flavored herb. You want to make sure you're getting the flavor you want from the plant that you're buying, and you're not relying on what someone puts on the label. Back to spearmint, in terms of its flavor, this is a wonderful herb to use in beverages like teas and also cocktails. And it also makes a lovely chopped garnish. You want those new sweet leaves to chop up and put on a savory dish or a heavy dish. And I like to do that with a little squeeze of lemon juice. The two of those together are just really, really nice. Harvesting is easy with mint. Just cut off the whole stem and then pick off the leaves and the flowers. The flowers are edible, but what that does in cutting off the stem is it encourages new growth from the base. It is said peak flavor for mint is just as the flowers start to appear on the plant. And so if you want to preserve mint, that's the time you probably want to harvest your mint and freeze it. Don't dry. It will not retain that flavor dried, but it does freeze well and retain the flavor well. Now, the leaves on the plants often, at least in my experience, they tend to survive way into winter. They last a long time, but the flavor doesn't hold. That cold really hurts the flavor. So if you want some of that nice mint flavor in the winter time, definitely freeze it when you've got a nice harvest in the summer. And then I do want to share my favorite herbs to grow indoors in a small space and start to focus with the fundamentals. What is your little indoor herb garden going to need to be successful? And first thing up is a lot of light. You want direct sun from a south or west facing window. You may want to consider a grow light. I have good windows, but I still use a grow light under the counter in my kitchen to start seeds and also for just supporting small plants, and it works really well. Now, Virginia Tech says that any herb that does not get more than 12 inches tall can typically be grown indoors in a 6-inch diameter pot. So that's what we want to focus on. And that means we want to focus on naturally compact or dwarf plants. And then if you want another plant that's not dwarf, you really want to see if you can find a dwarf variety of it to grow in a small pot. You always want to start with small starter plants or seeds. If you can grow it from seed, I really encourage you doing that if you're going to grow it indoors. And if you're going to buy a transplant, you definitely want something that's well smaller in its root ball than the 6-inch pot. So I usually look for that 2 to 4-inch size for one that I'm buying. Your pot should have good drainage. Do not go with a pretty pot that doesn't have drainage holes in it, or your plants will suffer. And you want a really good, fresh, quality potting mix. Don't recycle potting mix from something else, and definitely don't use soil from your garden. In terms of the herbs themselves, I recommend mint. It is hardy, it's resilient, it will thrive in a sunny spot. You can harvest it, you can shear it. It will last indoors for a long time. Parsley, this is definitely a time to grow it patiently from seed. That way you don't have to worry about that tap root. Just remember to harvest from the outside in with your little parsley plant. Cilantro, definitely grow it from seed. When I grow it inside, I plant it very thickly, and then I just harvest it quickly. It is a great candidate to grow as microgreens. And we have a recorded class on how to grow microgreens in our virtual classroom. And I really recommend, if you're interested in learning more about that, go find that class. It's a great class. Thyme and marjoram are both low maintenance. They're compact. They're perfect. They thrive. Get a little bitty plant, put it in a small container in a sunny spot. It will do great. And then, okay, basil is my stretch plant here. It wants to be sunny and warm, and that can be a little trickier in cooler months if the windowsill is chilly, but it's worth trying. I grow it every winter on a windowsill. You want to look for compact varieties. Most of them have the little bitty leaves, but I did recently find a reference to a variety called Italian Cameo that has the big leaves, and it's said to get only 12 inches tall. So I'm looking forward to trying that in the future. And then I know it's a little bit of a stretch and basil can be a little bit different, but I tell you, for me personally, it is worth having the taste of summer in the middle of winter. I just really love that. Last up, I would say use those herbs. If you're going to grow them indoors, use them. And one thing is to just enjoy the fragrance of what you have. Touch them, stir that fragrance up, enjoy that beautiful smell, and then harvest them lightly and harvest to shape them, to keep them pretty while you're growing them. And recognize that at some point you're going to need to renew them. And I recommend repotting them in the early spring. That's a time to not only shape them up, but to also prune the roots, refresh that potting mix. If something is just getting too big, if it looks unhappy in that small spot, then you might want to look for an outdoor space for it instead and just start again with a new tiny herb. That's part of the process of growing small plants indoors. So with that, a note of wisdom, sage advice from my garden, which is enjoy the sunshine while you can, because eventually we all end up in a recipe. So any questions?
Yes, we do have some questions. Thank you, Kathryn. That was really wonderful. First question, what herbs keep out gophers and deer if there are? There are such
None.
things.
None. I will say they're not necessarily going to keep anything out of your yard. I'm not sure that I can say this is truly science-based, but I know a number of folks have used lavender to create an entire bed around something like roses that they're growing because lavender, there are a lot of animals that don't like that. It also creates something of a barrier. When you're dealing with big critters like that that are trying to get at things, at the end of the day, it's going to come down to a barrier. There's no chemistry from a plant that's going to keep them away for very long, particularly if they're hungry. So I wish I had a better answer regarding what herbs can do for us, but it's really going to be a barrier.
One thing on bay leaves. Can you just harvest individual bay leaves or should you be cutting the stem? And will that encourage growth?
You really want to do your harvest by cutting the stem. You want to be shaping the tree and pruning it in a way that you're getting the growth that you want for it. I don't recommend pulling off individual leaves. Occasionally, you might see a leaf that looks like it's sort of near the end of its life. And you might just go ahead and take that one. But I wouldn't do that as a typical way of harvesting because your tree needs those leaves to feed itself, to photosynthesize. So that's why whether it's a bay tree or a basil plant, you don't want to just be picking the leaves off.
Okay, thank you. The next one is regarding parsley, the spacing of parsley. Could you start seeds indoors in a large container and then transplant the several en masse without affecting the roots?
I don't recommend that approach. If you're going to start them thickly, every one of those has its own little taproot. And typically, when we're doing something where we're disassembling close seed starting like that, like with tomatoes, we're pulling them all apart and then giving them their space. Parsley, the whole issue there is with that taproot and disturbing it. So, what I would say is if you want to start it indoors, and you don't want to traumatize those roots too much, use a peat pot. Plant it thickly to get the germination going, and then pick out your strongest seedling. Don't pull them out because, again, you're going to stir the roots up. Just clip off all the others. Leave your one strongest one and transplant that one into your garden.
There's another question about how do you freeze herbs? I mean, you spoke to some individually, but is there a general practice? This wasn't asking about a specific herb.
It's going to depend on the nature of the herbs.
Hmm.
Something like dill leaves, where they're very, very delicate, is I just smush them all together in the bag because when I thaw them, they're not going to maintain their structure at that point. They're going to be soft. So I just do it according to how much I'm going to use when I thaw it out and use it. With something like basil, I will blend up the basil leaves with some olive oil, put it in an ice cube tray, and freeze it that way. And you can use that approach, whether it's olive oil or water, depending on the herb. You can use that with a number of different herbs, but freeze it in cube size. That compartmentalizes it for how you may want to use it. But then I pop them out of the tray. I put them all together in a container and label it and put that in the freezer. I know my neighbor will freeze herbs on a cookie tray in the freezer and then transfer them into something. She uses her things a little bit differently than I do. I've not tried that, but she
Mhm.
says it works well if you just take out a leaf or two at a time and just very quickly break it up over a dish. To me, it's easier to just use the ice cube tray and not have to futz with that later.
You spoke to growing herbs in the kitchen near the windowsill. Someone had asked about growing herbs in a glass slider enclosed balcony. Would it be similar advice, or do you have anything separate to say
Um,
regarding that?
Yeah, I think the advice would be similar. If you have a balcony, you have the opportunity to have larger pots and to produce larger plants. That would affect some of the options that
Hmm.
you have for growing, but it being glass contained, it would be very much like doing that in any other indoor environment.
Do you have any tips regarding using a dehydrator for preserving?
I have a dehydrator and I've used it for a lot of different things over the years. I've used it for herbs, but I will tell you what I have gradually moved to is not using the heat on it at all because even low heat in the dehydrator extracts more flavor from the herbs. And so they just don't have as much flavor at the end when I use even low heat. But if I just use the fan, it's a little faster than if I'm not using the fan in terms of drying them. And that gives me the best flavor when I'm drying them. So I would recommend that. If you don't have a dehydrator, just cut stems, hang them somewhere that's cool and dry and dark. I have a spot in my basement, but it could be in a closet or somewhere else. And give them a few weeks, just undisturbed, just let them peacefully dry. What you don't want to have happen is you put them away and you find they're moldy later. So you want them to get completely dry. And then once you do that, you can package them up however you want in a jar, in a bag, whatever. And I have found I get really good flavor that way. And it keeps for a very long time as long as you keep it sealed up.
Do you typically keep them in jars, or do you have a different practice for different herbs?
When I dry them, I typically put them in jars. I can put the lid on real tightly and I just put them in my spice cabinet with everything else.
One last question. Has anyone grown cumin plants, an annual plant in our area, Zone 8A?
I know I grew it once years ago, but I'm afraid I really don't remember any details
Mhm.
about it.
Thank you, Kathryn, for your thoughtful and comprehensive presentation today on kitchen herbs. And thank you all for taking the time to attend today's presentation. And thanks again, Kathryn.
Thanks. Bye
Bye.
bye.